Okay, so we're getting ready to sew. Now, I'm not sure you can see it in the video, but right up top here I've got some brown thread, and actually it's cut off for you guys. Just tilt it up here, but even still, I don't know that you can see it. It's right up there. So I've got some brown thread, and I've put my bobbin up here, and I've loaded my bobbin, and I've threaded my machine. Make sure you thread it carefully, and use a scrap piece to make sure your tension's working well too. So once my machine is threaded properly with thread that matches my fabric, and I've checked my tension, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my machine for what I'm going to be working on. So here I've got, the machine is normally set at A. A is my straight stitch, but what I'm going to want to do is make my buttonhole. So that's what we're getting ready to work on. So I'm going to just switch from that regular setting right here at A. I'm going to switch it to this side of my buttonhole. I've put on my button foot, and basically this foot just slides with the fabric. I've positioned it over one piece of fabric, and I've got the needle going through the top bottom side of the buttonhole, and basically I'm going to be going from this part of the button down to this part of the button. I'm going to go along it and then reverse back and then stitch along it again. So you're going to end up with like this rectangle. So here's where I start. Put my needle right on my marking. You can't see my marking. It's not coming up well in the video, but it's still not even coming up that well on the photograph. But that's what I've done, is I've used my hand wheel and I've put the needle exactly on the top of the marking, and then I'm going to go ahead and put my presser foot down, and I'm going to start with sewing along. And as you can see, it's making this small zigzag. So I'm just going to back up a couple frames here and show you. Not only am I on number 1 here, but over here you can see that I've got this kind of red marking on the sewing machine. So here's 0, which means it's not going to move forward. Then we've got a number 1, which is a teeny tiny reinforcement stitch. 2 and 3, which are like your regular stitches, and number 4, which is your basting. So I'm not using basting or regular stitch or teeny tiny reinforcement stitches. I'm in this red area. So that's where I'm at, and over here I've got my zigzag stitch set to 5, and again I'm at number 1. So I put my needle, I've got the foot on, put the needle in place, put the foot down, started my zigzag all the way till I got to the end of my blue marking, which I can still see through the reinforcement piece of interfacing that I fused on there. So once I get here, I'm going to make sure that the thread is coming out of the left hand side, and my needle is all the way at the top, and then I'm going to change it to this setting. So I've done that left hand side of my buttonhole, and now I'm going to do one end of the buttonhole, and so that's what I've done. And just do maybe like 3 stitches. You don't want to do too much. You don't want like a heavy thickness here, but you just want to make sure that you've anchored the end of your buttonhole. And again, I'm on the left hand side of my buttonhole with my thread, and my needle is going to be in the uppermost position. And then I'm going to, and I'm missing this frame, so I'm just going to back up here, and then I'm going to switch to this one. This is the number 3, so that I can do the right hand side of my buttonhole. So here I am. I've gone up the other side, which is the right hand side of my buttonhole. So this is the one, the left side I did, then I went across, and now I've done this side. And when I get to the top, I'm going to make sure that the thread is coming out the left side, and that my needle is in the top position, and I'm going to put it back to here. So as you can see, they're numbered. So I do 1, then I do the bottom 2, and then I do 3, which is the right hand side, and then I go back to this one so I can do 4 the top. And this one's a little blurry, but all I've done is again like 3 stitches across the top. And just to be sure, I'm going to put it to the A, which is my straight stitch, and I'm just going to give it a couple stitches forward and a little couple stitches back, just to, you know, to really tack it in place so it doesn't fray. But we're just looking at 3 stitches either way, nothing too much. So here I have both of my buttonholes. I've done one and I've gone ahead and done the other. Now this takes some practice, so you're probably going to want to use some scrap pieces of fabric and practice until you're feeling very confident with your buttonholes before moving forward. So what you're going to do is you're going to put a pin at one end of your buttonhole, and you're going to use your seam ripper, and you're going to carefully, I mean carefully, insert it in that space in between the left and right, just at the one end. Put it in between there and gently and carefully cut along here till you get to the needle. So why did we put the needle there? That way if you're putting a little force here and you tend to push a little too hard and it goes whoop, you're not going to cut through those stitches there. It's actually going to stop you. So as you can see, there's the stitches I've done, and the needle is just ahead of it, and that'll stop my seam ripper from basically shredding those ones. So here I have my opening. This nice little neat opening. Okay, so these are the instructions we just went through. Number 1, apply a small scrap of fusible interfacing to the wrong side of the front over the buttonhole marking. Make buttonhole at marking. So we've done that. So now we need to go on to number 2, and that is stitch the inner leg seam of each pant section. And we're going to do that with the serger, but you don't have to use a serger to make these pants. I just want you to actually have that experience of using a serger, but you can do this on your sewing machine. The serger is not necessary, but you're going to think it's pretty cool because the serger is going to stitch and finish your seam all at the same time. So to get ready for stitching, I'm going to pin down one side of my pant leg. I've got one pant leg on the top and the other pant leg on the bottom. Again, they're pretty sides together right there. You can see they're pretty sides together. Now you're going to notice that there's a bit of a difference, and that difference is from the front and the back. And so what you're going to need to do is make sure that your little notches match up. So I've pinned along, and this time instead of parallel that I suggested doing when you were cutting, again parallel would be like in this direction for the cutting. Now for sewing, we're going to pin this way, perpendicular, so that it's really easy to pull them out as we're stitching. So here I've pinned one pant leg and I've pinned the other pant leg. So I've got my 2 pieces of fabric ready to go, pinned along one side. So this is basically like a tube. So I've taken one of the pieces of fabric, folded it in half, and I've pinned it along one edge, taken the other piece of fabric, folded it like a tube, and pinned along the open edge. So I'm going to take it over to my serger and I'm going to serge it. So the pattern is asking for a 5/8 seam, and I know some of you are not too good when it comes to your inches. So here's my seam gauge again. We're going to measure from this flat edge of your seam gauge, and here is 1 inch, and that's the flat edge right here. So from here to here is your 1 inch. And you can see it's divided into little sections. This right here is 1/2 inch. There's a little marking there, there, and there. So if we count them, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we need a 5/8 seam. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's your 1/2 inch mark, and you're 1 past it. So if an inch is divided in 8, 1/2 inch would be 4, and you're 1 past it. So for those of you who are really great with math, you're like, yes, miss, I get it, no problem. And for those of you who aren't so good with numbers, hopefully you'll appreciate me walking through it. So set your seam gauge there, and as you can see, I've lined it up with the raw edge of my fabric that I've pinned along. And this is where I'm going to need that stitching to end up. So you might want to try with a scrap of fabric and make sure that